I'm Catherine McDonald, and I'm the Policy and Partnerships Manager at Understanding Society, and I'm going to be sharing this presentation with my colleague Piotr Marzec, who's our Data Analyst and Training Officer. Okay, can I have the next slide, please, Claire? Okay, so we're going to endeavour to answer 4 main questions this afternoon. So what is Understanding Society, for those of you who don't already know? How does it work, and how can you access our data? And how has our data been used? Okay, next slide, please, Claire. Okay, so what is Understanding Society? I'm really sorry, Claire, I'm going to need to get those bigger. Maybe, I think what I'm going to do is open my presentation in a separate window and go from there, if that's okay. Okay, so I'll keep talking to you, obviously. Okay, so what I want to do is give you a whistle-stop tour of the key elements of what Understanding Society is and how it works. Again, for those of you who aren't already familiar. So Understanding Society is also known as the UK Household Longitudinal Study. It's a world-renowned national resource, and it's designed to capture life in the 21st century. And I think it's probably worth mentioning that in this context, obviously, longitudinal refers to research that involves repeatedly collecting data from the same sample over a period of time. Now, Understanding Society is really special due to its size and the range of questions that we ask our participants. The study is made up of a set of subsamples. So we started with an initial 40,000 households in 2009 and built on the British Household Panel Survey that had been running since 1991. So every year, the same people from thousands of households across all 4 countries of the UK are interviewed. Those interviews come in waves, and every member of the household is questioned, even the children. So no one gets away with it. So if you're between 10 and 15, you answer our youth questionnaire. And if you're under the age of 10, then we ask your parents or carers for information about you. So can I have the next slide, please, Claire? Okay, so hopefully you're now on the slide measuring the many layers of life. So that's exactly what Understanding Society does. We're a multi-topic study for rotating and event and age triggered content. I'll talk a little bit more about the event and age triggered content in a little while. But first, I'd just like to draw your attention to our key topics, which are listed on the left here. So that's education, employment, family and household, health and health behaviours and well-being, and that does include biomarkers and genetic and epigenetic data, income, wealth, expenditure and deprivation, and civic participation, so involvement in political groups, neighbourhood cohesion, environment, etc. On the right there, you'll see our supporting topics, and then underneath are smaller topics of interest and how they all link together. Now, an example of event or age-triggered content. So event-triggered content could be, for example, if one of our participants has a baby, that would obviously trigger some data that we would want to capture around that event. And similarly, as a participant reaches specific ages, that will trigger content that we'd like to capture. Okay, can I have the next slide, please? Okay, I don't know if you're going to be able to read this. It's all available on our website if you can't, but this is just a snapshot of our long-term content plan. So the study and the areas within it are divided into modules. So as you'll see, the modules are listed there down the centre. And on to the right where it says waves and a series of numbers, that's the wave in which that question was asked. So if there's a cross in that square, that you know that we asked that question in that wave, and if it's blank, then it means we didn't. So you see that there are core modules that we ask in each wave and other modules that rotate. And this gives you an at-a-glance guide. So if you're wanting to compare certain data because of your research question, a specific research question, then you can see at a glance what waves we ask those questions in. This is all available on the website, and I'll obviously direct you to that at the end of the presentation. So please dive in and take a look. Okay, could I have the next slide, please, Claire? So hopefully you're on the one now that says continued. So I'm just going to continue talking through the key elements of the study. So it's run with world-leading survey methodology. So it's an extremely high-quality data design, and it's supported by continuous innovative experimentation, development and testing. Data linkage is also a feature. So our study's data can be linked to administrative records from other sources to build an even richer picture. So an example of that would be the National Pupil Database, for example, which would enable a user of our data to link family circumstances with educational outcomes. I think another point to say is that it is a really complex data set. It's not the type of data that you can just dive into and start using. Hence why we run regular training courses for users and potential users in order to train you to use our data effectively. It's accessed via the UK Data Service, and it comes under 3 different licenses. And I think my colleague Piotr is going to go into all of that in a bit more detail in a second. And last but not least, obviously, we're funded by UKRI's Economic and Social Research Council and a consortium of government departments. So if we can just have the next slide there, Claire, you can see those there. So our co-funders group is the Department for Work and Pensions, Department for Health and Social Care, Department for Transport, the Welsh Government and the Scottish Government, and partners but not funders are the Department for Education and the Office for National Statistics. So can I have the next slide, please, Claire? Thank you. So with all that in mind, what is it that the study is actually measuring? You know, in real terms and in the real world, what are we capturing here? We're capturing continuously people's circumstances, attitudes, identity, subjective well-being, and their outcomes. We're capturing how individuals have reacted to policies and key events, and that could be through their changes in their behaviour and their outcomes and their thoughts. We're capturing relations between generations, couples and siblings. And because of the longitudinal nature of the study, we're charting all of this right across the life course. So we're measuring causes and consequences of social change. We're capturing data that tells us about life in the 21st century in the UK. So next slide, please, Claire. So what does the study provide? Well, in a word, data. But data for multidisciplinary research. Remember, we cover all of those topics, so we can facilitate multidisciplinary research. We're providing a measurement of both stability and change across the whole population over time. We're providing data on the role of the household context, family relationships, parental and family background, data on the experience of people in different places and policy contexts, which can then obviously be compared nationally, regionally, and locally. And also we're capturing data on a minority subpopulations. So for example, your research question may focus on single mothers or person with a disability, and you can separate those subpopulations with our study. And finally, data on different ethnic minority and migrant groups. So how can all of that be applied through cycles of policy or practice? Well, in many ways. So, for example, it can be used to diagnose problems. So our data can give new insights into that can then inform policy development, provide impetus for campaigns or funding applications. Apologies, Claire, I didn't say change the slide there. So we should be on the one that begins applications through cycles of policy and practice. Apologies there. So picking up on the second point, our data can provide evidence, much needed evidence for improvement or change. It can be used to monitor and evaluate outcomes and performance. And it can also be used in modelling what-if scenarios and in comparative studies. So who currently uses Understanding Society? This is the next slide on, Claire. So hopefully you're on the one that says who uses Understanding Society. So academics and researchers, we have a wealth of academics and researchers who come to us and use our data. Charities, think tanks, government departments, businesses, and of course, we're always keen to explore new two-way mutually beneficial collaborations as well. So if you as an individual or the organisation you work for thinks you could benefit from using our data, then please don't hesitate to get in touch. I'll provide all our contact details at the end of the presentation, and we would love to hear from you. Okay, so what we offer across the year. So that's the next slide, please, Claire. So events, obviously, so pre-pandemic, face-to-face, and obviously we hope to get back to those soon. But at the moment, obviously, everything online, and that's webinars and seminars and conferences and data dives, where we focus on a specific research question and gather people together from that field to interrogate our data and come up with some potential solutions to that question. Direct access, which is bespoke analysis for government departments. We run regular training courses, hands-on training courses on how to use our data. The next one, if you're interested, is the 17th and 18th of November this year. Again, at the end of the presentation, I'll put up the link so you can register for that if you think that you'd like to come on that. But if you don't have time for a hands-on training course, they do run over a couple of days. We also run an online Moodle course as well, which you can log on to at any time. We also provide an array of publications. I think the most prominent of which is probably our Insights one, which we tend to release once a year. Some of you may already be familiar with that. But all of this information is available on our website. And again, I'll direct you towards that at the end of the presentation. So on to the next slide, please, which is our COVID-19 survey. So obviously, having just discussed everything we've touched on there, last year, when the pandemic hit, Understanding Society was perfectly placed to start capturing data on the effects of the pandemic. So we contacted our participants, who'd taken part in at least one of the last two data collections, to ask them if they'd be up for taking part in a short web survey or telephone survey about their experiences of the pandemic and how it was unfolding around them. About a third of them said yes. So starting from April last year, we surveyed them monthly through to July, and then bi-monthly from September through to March of this year. We asked a whole range of questions. So everything from symptoms, testing, health service utilization, employment, schooling, income, finances, caring, loneliness, exercise, and alcohol consumption. We're in the process of also conducting antibody testing, and we hope to do a closing survey this summer. So there are, I think, 7 waves of that data available and already being utilized. So I'm now going to hand over to my colleague Piotr. I hope he has better luck with his slides than I did. But Piotr is going to explain more in depth about how our study is designed and how to access it effectively, because as I said, it is a complex data set and we want you to be able to use it to its max. And that goes for our COVID-19 data and all our data on all the other societal issues. So Piotr, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you very much, Catherine. My name is Piotr Marzec. I'm a data analyst and training officer at Understanding Society. And today I would like to give you a brief introduction into more technical aspects of our study. I'd like to start with the study history and the sample development. So, as Catherine mentioned, Understanding Society started in 2009, but it was preceded by a closely related study, the British Household Panel Survey. It was a similar study, so a group of people was tracked over time. They were interviewed every year, and quite a lot of questions in the British Household Panel, BHPS, are either the same or similar to the ones in Understanding Society. So that's another way in which the studies are connected. And it was a very successful study, but at some point it was decided that there was a need to expand and revise the study. And most importantly, it was decided that the study should have a much larger sample to better represent subgroups of the populations and most importantly, minorities, ethnic minorities. So this led to a new study, and with a fairly complex design, because we wanted to study a lot of people and at the same time at a reasonable cost. So the sample of Understanding Society is actually a set of subsamples. So we have the general population sample, the ethnic minority boost sample, the British Household Panel Survey sample, which is available from wave 2 onwards, and the immigrant and ethnic minority boost sample. The general population sample, that's the most important, in a way, the core sample of our study, because it's the most numerous. So there are 26,000 households. There is a Great Britain part, which is clustered and stratified, and there is a Northern Ireland part, which is a simple random sample. Then we have the British household panel survey sample. These are, at least in wave 2, at around 8,000 households, which participated in the BHPS and agreed to continue and participate in Understanding Society. But this is fairly important because this offers you a unique opportunity to track households and individuals as far back as in 1991. And the data, many parts of the data between the BHPS and Understanding Society are fairly comparable because the questions are similar. So this is something very, very important and a great advantage of Understanding Society. Then we have boost samples. So just a few words about what boost samples are and why we need them. So as I said, that one of the aims of the study was to better represent subgroups of the population, specifically minorities. So in any survey, where if you want to represent groups which are small, let's say 1% of the population, even if you have a survey with a very large sample, let's say 40,000 people, that 1% is still only 400 in your sample, right? So what can be done is selecting people from such groups in proportion which is higher than the proportion that they make in the population. This is called oversampling. And in this way, instead of 400 people, you can get 2,000 people, for example. And we have two such samples. So firstly, there's the ethnic minority boost sample, which is available which was included from the beginning of the study. And the household that qualified so it's like additional 400 households, and to qualify, there had to be at least one member from 5 major ethnic minority groups: Indian, Pakistani, Bangladeshi, Caribbean, and African. And then there was another, in a way, similar sample added in 2015, but in this case, there was one additional condition. A household to qualify, there had to be at least one member from these 5 ethnic minority groups, or someone born outside of the UK. So this allowed for better representation of people like me, for example. So the EU immigrants, for example, or any other immigrants, but the EU immigrants, that's a sizable group, and it wasn't represented that good before. One final thing about our sample is how representative it is. And here there are 2 points. So first of all, the study didn't cover and include Northern Ireland before 2001. So our sample is representative before 2001. It's the data collected before 2001 is representative only of Great Britain. And from 2001 onwards, the whole of the United Kingdom is represented. Second point is that technically our sample is representative of all subgroups of the population, but is, as in any survey, even a survey with a large sample, a very large sample like ours, it may happen that some groups may be too small for a good representation. So for example, if you are looking for specific occupations within just one minority, then you basically, it's almost impossible to do that in a survey research, unless you survey a very specific group, not the whole population like we do. One of the consequences of this complex design of the study is that the data need to be weighted, and we highly recommend weighting our data using weights that we provide anytime you use and analyze our data. The reason we need these weights is, first of all, to correct for sample design. So something that I just discussed. So because we have so many different subsamples, and most importantly, the boost samples, some groups of people are overrepresented. So you have, the percentage of the in the sample is larger than it is in the population, which means that, for example, for some variables, let's take an example of income, which is on average people, and take an example of ethnic minorities. On average, many of these ethnic minorities, they earn less. So you have, what happens is that in our sample, you have more people than you would have in the population who earn less. So obviously, the estimate for the whole UK would be underestimated because you have too many people who earn less. That's basically how this works, and that's why you need to wait and to correct for that. Secondly, you need to wait. To correct for non-response. So basically, households and people who refuse to take part in the study in wave 1, and also you need to account for the attrition in the sample. So basically, people who drop out from the study, even though if they took part in wave 1. So the reason why you need to account for that, you need special weights for this, is because quite often the social demographic profile of people who do not take part, and the households who do not take part, and people who drop out from the study is different, systematically different from the people who answer and who take part in the study. And finally, you need to correct for the sampling error, so something which results from pure chance, so basically a statistical error. So the way in which weights work, it's like with any other survey. So those people or households with a higher selection probability or a higher response propensity are given lower weights, and those with a lower selection probability or response propensity are given higher weights. And for producing weighted estimates, every sample unit is multiplied by the weights, and then the computations are done on these weighted observations. So if we have too many people, after weighting, the number of them is slightly reduced by the right amount, and if we have too few, then after weighting, we have more people. And for the final word, that we highly recommend using weights in any analysis using our data, and we also highly recommend taking into account clustering and stratification. There are two variables, PSU and strata. I mentioned that earlier that some of our samples are clustered and stratified, and to get the most robust analysis possible, you need to basically use features offered by major statistical packages, which allows you to account for complex sample design, clustering, and certification. I would like to say a few words about the data structure in understanding society. The most, Catherine has already mentioned that, and the most important thing to understand here is that we don't offer a single data set. So this is different from many, especially cross-sectional surveys. In our case, there's a lot of different files. There are a lot of different files. So we have different data sets, data files for different waves, for different questionnaires, and for different levels. That is the household level and the individual level. The reason for that is that the amount of data is such, and the number of variables, that it wouldn't be efficient to provide the data as one single large file. However, there are some simple rules and ways in which you can get orientation in our data. So first of all, we do have a way-specific prefix. The rule here is that the consecutive letters of the alphabet, they denote the consecutive numbers. So A stands for 1, B stands for B, and so on. So any file starting with A underscore, that's a file from wave 1, and so on. And secondly, we have root file names. In each name of each data file, there is a root file name, and this basically it relates to data. It tells you from which source the source or level the data come from. And we have 4 major questionnaires in understanding society. So first of all, for each household, before anyone in that household answers any of the questionnaire, there is a questionnaire filled out by the interviewer. It's called the address record form, and this is about neighborhood observations and some external characteristics of the household. And the root filing for data coming from this questionnaire is HHSump. Then we have the enumeration grid. This is a questionnaire filled out, completed by one household member who provides a complete list of all people living in that household and provides some basic information, demographic information about those people. Then we have the household questionnaire, which is answered by the same person, but in this case, it is about the household. So things like household amenities, expenses, mortgages, deprivation. And finally, the individual questionnaires, which are personal interviews with individuals who consented to give such an interview in the household. And there are two such questionnaires. One is for youth, so children aged 10 to 15, and the data from this questionnaire is stored in a file called youth. And the adult questionnaire, which is for all consenting individuals aged 16 and older, and the data from this questionnaire is kept in the INRESP file. And finally, we have some information is also collected about children, younger children, so aged 0 to 9 years old. And this is taken from the parents and their guardians, and this is stored in a file called child. Our data, if you wanted to access our data, it is available from the UK Data Service website. To access it, you need to register with the UK Data Service, and then you need to choose which license you need, which I'm going to talk about in a minute. And basically, you accept the terms of the license, and then you can download the data. I mean, it's that easy only for the end-user license. And we have basically 3 different levels of access for researchers. The reason why there are different levels is because there are some there's some very sensitive and potentially disclosive data in our study, and what you get in the end user license, which again is getting access, is quite simple. You just need to register with the UK Data Service, and then you accept the terms of the end user license, and you can download it almost straight away. And it's for most researchers, that's enough, because it contains the absolute majority of variables. However, there are some variables which are more sensitive. And an example is sexual orientation or more disclosive. And these are some geographical variables, because in the end user license, you get 3 such variables: region, country, and rural urban indicator. And if you need something below that, so for example, local authority district, then you need to apply for special license. Here, the process is more strict. It's slightly longer. You need to provide rationale why you need these variables. But it's basically you just it's almost if only you can say why you need them, you would be granted access. You just need to remember that it sometimes takes a few weeks to get access to the data. So if you want to use it, just remember to apply for this data well in advance. And finally, there is also not only there is secure data service, which is actually not only a separate license, it is a different way of accessing data. Because for secure data service, you can't download the data, you access it remotely through a special platform. And this is for the most disclosive information, so the smallest geographies, meaning grid reference, which allows you to very precisely identify households, and for things like the exact date of birth. And here the process is longer, and you need to provide much more details why you need it, because basically at this level you have access to really very disclosive data, because you can basically identify individual households. Catherine mentioned the possibility of data linkage, and there are 2 ways in which you can link our data. So first of all, we provide, for some data, we provide the linking variable only, and the user does the linking. And there are some data sets which were available where we did the linking. So this example, again mentioned, but Catherine, is the National Pupil Database. So first of all, we have an example of such an identifier variables are geographical locator variables. These could be local authority district, Westminster parliamentary constituencies, census, lower and middle layer super output areas, to name just a few. And these variables can be used to link our survey data to some special and geographical context data. For example, census or election data. These geographical locator variables are available as separate download, again from the UK Data Service, and under special license or secure access. Then we have school codes, a similar thing. So we just basically provide you a school code for whenever we have it for a child, and then you can link the child to the information about school, about that particular school, using the code. And finally, there is a national people database, and here we did the linking. So for those children for whose parents gave us consent and for whom the matching was possible, you get some attainment and pupil characteristics from the national pupil database. And to reiterate, the goal here is to link family circumstances and education outcomes. And my final, the last thing I want to discuss is a few more information about the COVID survey data, looking at it from a data perspective. So it is highly, it's a study which is closely related to understanding society main stage survey. However, it is a separate data download because it is a separate question and a separate study in a way. But the data structure is still similar to our main survey. So there are separate files for each waves, and for each wave there is more than one file. There is a similar naming convention, so for files and variables as well. It's just that there is an additional C in the prefix to signify that it's a COVID survey. And most importantly, this data, so the data with the information from a separate questionnaire could be linked to all that information we have from the main survey, because we have a PADP variable, which is a unique individual identifier. So each person who we interviewed in the COVID study could be, their data from the COVID study could be linked to their data from these waves in the main survey, which they participated in. And this adult interview data is available in a series of interest files. So thank you very much for your attention. And now I would like Catherine would like to tell you a bit more about the study.
Thanks, Piotr. Yes, Claire, if I could ask you to put up slide 15 again, that would be great. Thank you very much. So what I wanted to do now is to just bring our data to life, actually, for you, and just show you who's used it, just a few snapshots of who's used it and how they've used it and what they've used it to show. So if we start with the Children's Society, so in 2020, in their Good Childhood Report, they looked at our youth questionnaire, so our 10 to 15-year-olds, and they asked them questions about how they felt about their life as a whole, so family, friends, appearance, schoolwork, and our data was able to show them that 10 to 15-year-olds' happiness with life as a whole had actually fallen between 2009 and 10 and 2017 and 18, with girls falling further than boys. And in addition, there'd been a fall in the boys' happiness with their appearance. So that data gave way to evidence that was able to support young people's mental health in ways like drop-in centres or dedicated support for young carers, and via one-to-one support for young people at risk of going missing from home or care. And next slide, please, Claire. So now onto the charity Mind. So they use 7 years worth of Understanding Society data to show that people who rented were significantly more likely to have experience of poor mental health than those who owned their own home. And people living in the social rented sector had 4% higher risk of experiencing mental health problems compared with a 2% increase in the private sector. So that data informed Mind's call for the development of a social housing strategy that had mental health right at its heart, including protecting and improving existing social housing. And now on to data from our COVID-19 survey, which informed a report from the Wales Institute for Social and Economic Research, Data and Methods. And that was on home working before and during the lockdown. So research found that home working had been slowly increasing before lockdown anyway. In January and February of 2020, 5.7% of workers worked from home. Obviously, that increased dramatically and suddenly. And in April 2020, it was at 43.1%. But again, that data helped informed the Welsh Government and encouraged them to explore remote working hubs. And they have since announced that they've got a long-term ambition to get 30% of Welsh workers working from or near home. So on to the next slide there, please, Claire, which is slide 18. So Age UK. So analysis showed that our over 80s save the government £23 billion a year by providing unpaid care to loved ones. So again, our data showed that our over 80s provide 23 million hours of unpaid care a week, which equates to 1.2 billion hours a year. 30% of our over 80s are carers, and that number has risen by 23% since 2010. 71% have long-term health problems of their own, and 24% are caring for more than 35 hours a week. Okay, next slide, please, Claire. Research published by the Department for Transport, carried out by NatSen Social Research, used data from Understanding Society and also the English Longitudinal Study of Aging. And it found that health problems increase markedly with age, especially when you compare the 65 to 79 and 80 plus age groups. Those impairments typically associate with a decline in travel, and that's both private and public travel. So obviously that research can help the Department for Transport understand what an ageing population could mean for future travel. Next slide, please, Claire. And then finally, back to our COVID-19 survey. So NatSen used our data to identify 6 different financial experiences of the pandemic. And those were undisrupted, beneficiaries, self-supporters, copers, help seekers, and multi-strugglers. Research found that mental distress actually increased in all of those groups, and it was biggest amongst those classified as help seekers. Multi-strugglers face the highest levels of mental distress, both before and after the crisis. And people from Black, Asian and minority ethnic backgrounds were twice as likely as white people to be help seekers. There are many more case studies on our website. If you go to our impact section, this is the landing page of our website that I just wanted to talk you through, Claire. So that's slide 21. So understandingsociety.ac.uk is our address. And you can see from the tabs there that you can find out a lot more about how to use the study and how the study is built, and the topics we cover and the research that it gives way to. We've got a cracking publications section on that. And final slide, please, Claire. So the all-important contact us one. So as I said, if you or your organisation thinks you could benefit from using our data, we would love you to get in touch. So the Policy and Partnerships Unit email address is up there, as is mine. Then the third one down, the User Support Forum. So as the title suggests, that's an online forum where users of our data can get together and share experience and ask questions. You can also email the user support team directly. That online course that I talked about, the Moodle one, that's the link to sign up for that. And you can also sign up for our newsletter. And of course, you can follow us on social media, so on Twitter and LinkedIn. So thank you very much. Thank you, Claire, for seeing me through my slides there. So that's the end of the presentation. I know we're running late. But we have got a few questions. Have we got time for a few questions? I'd like to also introduce Raj Patel, who's our Associate Director for Policy, and Raj is also on hand to answer some questions. I don't know, Raj, if there's anything you'd like to add to anything Piotr and I have said.
No, let's just plow through the questions because there are questions there. So I think that might be best way to do it. And I think probably starting at the bottom because I think those are the kind of initial questions. So there's a question from Sarah who wants to know a bit more about which you decide or identify which weights to use for particular groups? So I'm assuming if you were interested in lone parents, let's say, or people who were furloughed or some subgroup, how do you decide what, and you want to translate your findings, I guess, at your population level, then how would you decide weights to use? And Piotr, you might be best.
Yes, so basically, this is fairly complex, but we offer in our user guide and on our website, there is a guide. So basically, it depends. There are a few things. So it depends what. So it works like quite differently to other surveys, especially cross-sectional surveys where the number of weights is small. We have a lot of weights. And which one to choose, it depends on a few things. So first of all, at which level is your data? And this is either individual or the household level. So this is the first thing. Then it also depends whether you want to analyze our data cross-sectionally or longitudinally. There are separate ways for these two types of analysis. It also depends on from what is the source of the data. So which questionnaire? There are separate weights for this, and that's a very, very complex topic. So I would suggest visiting our website, and first of all there is a separate part of the user guide. It's only about weighting, and also there is a weighting FAQ. That are dozens of questions there, and plus also you can also, if you wanted to use our data, there is user support forum, and there were a lot of questions. A lot of questions have been already answered, Anna. So yeah, so basically that's what I would say. We will also have a weighting workshop in November. So if you wanted to use our data, again, I highly recommend. Just considering attending that workshop. Yeah,
and I think it's worth saying that the largest number of queries we get are about weights. So feel free to drop us a line. Sometimes people want to look at a very specific group, and it may be that you need a more customized weight, in which case we can advise the user support team can kind of advise you on how to do that as well. So certainly, I think in addition to what Piotr said. The next question was, what's Understanding Society's approach to consent? Does each household member consent every year? And what about 10 to 15-year-olds who complete a questionnaire as well? And then, indeed, does data linkage require explicit consent?
So,
do you want to take that, or do you want to take that?
Sure, yes. I mean, so answer is yes to all of these questions. So consent is given every year, so for each wave, and actually for each question. So you can refuse answering any of the questions that are in any of the questionnaires. So youth, so those aged 10 to 15, yes, they also give consent, and they give that consent on their own. And yes, we collected separate consents for each kind of data linkage we do.
Yeah, I think it's so there is a separate information we provide online, which tells you in which year we asked for consent to link to administrative data, and you can see what sort of you can see the letter that was sent to the participants. So, for instance, if we were to link to the national database, that would have required a consent. I suspect from the parents. I'm not sure whether it was necessarily from the 10 to 15-year-old. And then we usually find that at least between 50 and 70% of the panel members tend to agree to consent. And that's often the easier part. The difficult part is to actually then subsequently link the data, which involves negotiations with departments, obviously, and quite a lot of technical issues, to make sure we can find the right match between our sample member and an individual in an administrative data source as well. So all data linkage we carry out does require explicit linkage, explicit consent as well. We are trying to experiment with whether it's feasible to ask for multiple consents. So at the moment, our policy is very much for every particular individual data set we want to link, we will ask for an individual consent, but it may be that there are better ways to try and do that. And so we're carrying out some kind of trials on that at the moment through our innovation panel. The next question again from Sarah was, does Understanding Society track households or individuals? And what happens when a tracked household splits? I can pick that up. So there is no such thing as a longitudinal household, i.e. households change all the time. So the study is actually tracking individuals. And then effectively what happens when a household splits, or let's say not a household, but a couple split, for instance. If they were original sample members, we'll want to continue interviewing both those members, but often you find that sometimes when you get a split in a household, you might lose one of the partners from the survey. And usually often that what happens is, for instance, if it was a family with children, usually you end up tracking the mothers because often they're also the ones who end up looking after the children. We are also looking at trying to collect better data where households split, so that in fact we can follow up with the person who left the household and be able to track them. If it's a question of children growing up and moving out, then if they were a child of an original sample member, then we'll continue following them, let's say through education, ultimately, if they set up their own household, if they get married or establish a relationship, then we'll continue tracking them through that process. So in that sense, the nature of the household is always quite dynamic. And if they ultimately end up marrying and having kids, then there are kind of following rules that we have. Again, there's a kind of whole story behind how we follow individuals. But I hope that kind of, in a brief sense, answers that question. I don't know whether you want to add anything on tracking households, Piotr.
No, I mean, I would just say that it's like the work it works is that we, in wave one, we started with we have a sample of households. Then we learned who was living in these households. So then we were able, and all those people who were present and interviewed in these households, they become original sample members. And basically the rule is that we try to follow all original sample members, even if they lived at household. And it actually, I can answer the next question because it's related, and that's a good, so the next question is, how do we account for subgroups residing in non-traditional household, squatters or homeless people? So basically, in wave one, we couldn't account for those people. So basically, because we interviewed like private households, but if an original sample members move out and become, I don't know, let's say that someone is in prison in wave two, we try to go, or in a care home, we try to interview there. Obviously, this is not easy, but yeah, but that's what we try to do. So at least if someone is an original sample member, meaning that they were interviewed in wave one, we try to track them later. But obviously, this is very hard with homeless people. So it's basically we are not able to represent homeless people in our sample, unfortunately.
Yeah, brilliant, thank you. And the final question is, what genetic information do we collect? Again, there is a very nice little video clip on our website which explains what biomarker and genetic data we collect. It's a kind of 10-minute clip, so you should be able to view that and get that information. I suspect it'll probably take us a bit longer to explain that online, but by and large, half of the sample at wave 2, and subsequently, for those who were part of the British Household Panel study at wave 3, received a nurse visit. And as part of the nurse visit, which was only in Great Britain, there were other kind of criteria for selection into those visits. People were asked if they wanted to give a blood sample. Who agreed to giving blood samples were then those blood samples were then subsequently used to derive genetic information. So there's quite a complex process about accessing the genetic data. But the difference here is that we also have very rich social information on those individuals themselves. And again, if you want further information, just email us at the details Catherine provided, and we can give you a lot more information on the use of genetics and genetic data. Brilliant. I don't know if either Catherine or Piotr want to add anything else. I suspect we've probably slightly overrun, but
yes, we have. Yeah, we have, and I believe there's a fireside chat starting now. So we must let you all go to that. So thank you for listening, and please do get in touch. Thank you.
Thank you very much.